I'm lucky to have next to Dr. Robert Shalwitz, founder of Inversa Inc. He's going to be speaking both about, and we've had the pleasure of chatting with you about this on and off for the last couple weeks and also a couple months. Both the sort of scientific, I think which your expertise is the scientific background behind how our DNA repairs itself over time, which again, as we talked about, I was like, I had no idea. If your DNA is messed up, you're in big trouble. And also a little bit of sort of how that connects to your spiritual life and the idea of Tikkun and Jewish life. So I'll let you do most of the talking, but I'm very glad to be having you close out our Scientists in Synagogue series.
I'm Bob Shalwitz. I happen to be a pediatric endocrinologist. For those of you who don't know what an endocrinologist is, but I studied hormones and I took care of young children with things like diabetes, thyroid diseases, adrenal problems, things like that. But then, amazingly, in 1995, I decided to take a job with Abbott Labs here, and I became a drug developer. So I actually developed drugs, pharmaceuticals, for good purposes. I have a couple pharmaceuticals that probably one of you or maybe more of you have taken, and I'm very proud of that work. And I've remained in this space of working on it. But when I was there at Abbott, my team discovered a really exciting compound. And at that time, we started getting very involved with thinking about things related to DNA injury, because of how the compound worked. And that's kind of motivated a lot of my career since about the late 1990s. I've been working on this for way too long. So that's me. And I'm fortunate to be here with my principal consultant, happens to be my wife, and Paula's here, and she'll interrupt in case I go far astray. So let's start with some questions. Here are 4 questions. Take a look. I'm just going to give you 2 seconds to think about it before I go to the answers, right? Think about, all the things you learned about DNA. What exactly happens? What happens to a cell when DNA gets injured? And does this happen often? Is this something that really happens, every day? And by the way, is the cell always successful in repairing its DNA? Tough question. Any questions before I move on to the answers? Okay. All right. Well, what did I do? Okay. So, what is the purpose of DNA? You've all learned about DNA in school. DNA is the essence of why we are able to be a multi-celled organism. Without this, you don't age. You don't replicate, your cells don't replicate, you cannot become this incredible multicellular organism that you are. But even whether you're a 2-cell organism or not, you need to have a way to provide information beyond. So cells without DNA, there are some things that don't have DNA, really have a rough time, cannot build in terms of their ability to build as an organism. So it's the key to having multicellular organisms, the key to being human. And so what happens to a cell when the DNA gets injured? Such as what things could happen. You all know that DNA is a double helix. You all learned about that probably in school, and maybe you didn't. But in any case, there's a double helix, and that contains all this amazing information for every protein that's in your body, how it's structured. And so what happens when
Can I ask what you mean by the term injured?
Injured. Oh, let's say it gets broken apart. That's called a double-strand break. And can it come back together? Yeah. Because interestingly enough, when you break apart DNA, so DNA has all these codes in it. And these codes, if you double-strand break it, which happens with like radiation, which happens in case certain types of chemicals, can just happen spontaneously because of all sorts of oxidative injury, you could lose huge amounts. So when it puts that helix back together, what if you lose all that information? What if it's gone? Will the cell keep going? Well, it turns out the cell will keep going. And this happens actually not infrequently. Just to give you an example, this is out of an amazing paper that I sent to my whole team recently, and I don't expect you to understand it, but there's some very cool things here on this curious slide. Just to back up my comment, this was just published looking at a whole series of things of DNA injury. So SSB stands for single strand break. That's over out on the right side. DNA can get injured. It happens all the time, and the cell will attempt to repair that DNA. So, by the way, if you ask your typical doctor what happens when the DNA gets injured in a cell, that doctor most commonly will say that cell dies. But how often does DNA get injured in a given day? So this is the average one cell. How many cells do you have? You have 3 trillion cells in your body, not including the bacteria in your body.
Wow.
Okay? So you also have, by the way, about 4 trillion bacteria. So 20,000 events. This is for a typical cell in the body. It turns out that some of your cells have much more. Your eyes, there are a lot more events right in your eye, particularly the front of your eye, because, of course, the eye is exposed to ultraviolet radiation, right? So, in fact, your DNA gets injured all the time in your eyes, and it has to be really good at repairing it. So, in fact, it is very good, and thank goodness, because, in your skin, you can shed skin, right? Because, your top layers of skin are already dead, right? They're just there, they're contiguous, but they're already dead, and they help to absorb the punishment from outside, all the stuff that you run into, physical injury, chemical injury, radiation injury, all those things. But in fact, the eye doesn't have that luxury. Could you imagine if the cells of your eye were always being shed off of the cornea, off the front of your eye? You wouldn't be able to see a thing. So it's a really remarkable system. So we continuously repair the DNA so that we can continue and go on and still replicate and age. Is the cell always successful? Well, of course, the answer to that is no, because 1, we don't live forever. That's number 1. Number 2, we know people get cancers. We know mutations can occur. The other thing is we all know that we age. And the principal cause of the aging actually is accumulated DNA injury. We're going to talk mostly about that today. But these are the kind of basic concepts you have to start with. Because I have to tell you, most people have never thought about this. Why would you? What happens to my DNA? Oh my God, But anything you can think of can happen to your DNA. And when you lose those signals, right, then all of a sudden, whatever it's encoding is no longer coding correctly. And so the issue of DNA repair is very, very important. And then on the left side, you see double-strand breaks. So you see, thankfully, double-strand breaks don't happen very often. Single-strand breaks you can repair, right? It's just broken. You have a template there. That's the beauty of it being double-stranded. There's a template you can repair to the template. But double-strand breaks broken apart, then you have to go back and compare to the other chromosome, the other gene, right? That's on the other chromosome, right? We have pairs. Remember, we all have pairs of chromosomes. So very complicated. And there's lots of things on there that I just wanted to show you all the different names, things that can happen to all those base pairs and things like that. One of the things that's on there is this very inconspicuous looking one called 8OXOG. This stands for oxidation injury. You all everyone talks about eating antioxidants, right? Like vitamin E. Well, actually, vitamin E and lots of antioxidants are very important for minimizing the number of 8-OXOG events that occur. And these can be incredibly destabilizing for the chromosome, for the gene. So it's just an interesting array of stuff, photodimers from sunlight. Why do people tell you to wear sunglasses? It's to prevent against this type of injury in your eyes when you're outside, and lots of other things. So this is something that's happening all the time. You'll notice, by the way, these are all, with superscripts, right? So 10 to the third stands for it's in the thousands. And so you can just see how many. And if for depurination, which is another interesting form of this, and single strand breaks for your typical cell bright, those are 10 to the fourth. That's 10,000. It could be 100,000 per day. So a complicated space, but I'm dwelling too long, so I'll keep going. So what happens with all this? So remember I said that DNA injury is in fact probably the major cause of aging. So it seems a little unlikely. You would think aging, gee, I'm just getting older. My cells are getting older, so they're not working so well, right? But why aren't they working so well? We all want to wonder, why is my hearing no good? Why is this something else? The major reason for that is that you start to accumulate, even as good as your cells are at repairing, you start to accumulate injury within your whole DNA substructure. And if this becomes too much, then in fact, it's not working as well, and you accumulate problems. So DNA damage is a major cause of things, and you can see on there, remember on the slide, it says cellular senescence. That means the cells stop replicating. So think about muscles. If they don't replicate the cells, you can't repair them. You can't get enough cells. If you go and hit it, right, you can't repair it because you can't replicate anymore. Or you can't, your whole energy systems may not work. So particularly diabetes is related to DNA damage and a lot of other things. So complicated space that you're not typically thinking of. Everybody just thinks, well, we just age, right? We just get older. No, you just don't just get older. You get older for a reason. So this is kind of helps you to understand it. So my idea was to give you pictures of what's going on, because to get into the really deep, dark science of DNA repair is a tough space. It's very complicated. I will have a slide on every single detail you ever wanted to know. I won't take you through it. But it's the idea you accumulate DNA damage, and you want to avoid that. And the way you can avoid that is by DNA repair. So you see that aging, there's this little green arrow. You want to repair DNA damage. So you see the red bar there. That's the idea that if you have good DNA repair mechanisms, you can repair that damage, and your cell can go on, it can replicate, and it can go on to produce another good quality cell, and it can continue to perform its job. For a minute, we should stop and think about the brain. The brain doesn't replicate much. If your cells were constantly replicating, you wouldn't remember. It does replicate some. It's very slow. There's lots of actual places in your body where cells don't replicate much. The brain is very protective. It's in the crazy head of yours, which is a lot protected. There's no sun coming in. The only sun that's coming in is through your eyes, and that only gets to the retina, right? But the brain is well protected, and that's great. It's also very protected from chemical injury because of the way the bloodstream is designed. And thank goodness for this, because if our brain had so much DNA injury, which it still has some, in particular, let's say if you become hypoxic or you get knocked out, like a car accident or playing football, many other things, then it's very hard it's actually pretty tough on the brain, because you don't have lots of extra cells to replace, to bolster the response. So the brain is very good about this. So its number of injuries per day is probably quite a bit lower. And there are other places in the body where it's quite a bit lower too. But anyway, so if we can improve our DNA repair mechanisms, we could age better, we could live longer, and we could have less problems while we're aging. Maybe less cancer, or maybe less infection, because we know how to fight off infection better. That would be the benefit if we could do it better.
So where in the body would the most damage happen?
Well, actually, the eyes are the worst.
Okay.
Because there's no protection. There's no physical protection. The next worst, the skin actually is quite bad, because, ultraviolet radiation penetrates right through those dead cells. It goes right to the actual cells, the living cells.
Yeah.
You only got a few layers to protect. The radiation goes right through. And then the gut is hugely impacted.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
But the gut can turn over cells. The gut is really good. It's getting rid of cells. So it actually gets rid of cells very aggressively. A lot of what's in your poop is cells that have died, right? Because there's a huge amount of turnover. And then everything else depends. The heart, by the way, does have quite a bit, particularly if you get older, your ability to pump blood is not as good.
Okay.
The lung is another place that has a fair amount. You're inhaling lots of stuff. The second largest killer in the world right now is respiratory disease. Lung disease is huge across the whole globe because of increased pollution and lots of other things that are going on related to plastics and a lot of other things around the globe. So DNA injury from all sorts of stuff are things that you wouldn't expect. Thankfully, brain has not gone, not there.
Yeah.
The heart, though, is tough. It's a big place. So are there things you can do? So yes, you can get online and you can read about a zillion things that you might be able to do. And I will tell you, just to be honest with you, the data is not good. In terms of does diet improve it? Yes, there are certain little really unique elements in diet that are really important. Certain micronutrients, some other things. The problem is it's hard to do those studies because these are 20 and 30 and 40-year studies. So the data is not going to be overly compelling, but in the lab, the data actually is pretty good for a lot of very good elements. So yes, you should really eat your vegetables, by the way. It's really important. And you really should stay up on what you're doing, and you should stay well hydrated, and you should do things to avoid getting cardiac disease, because what does the cardiac system do? It protects the whole body from things like oxidative injury and things like that. And exercise is also, the data on exercise is actually the best. It's better than the data on diet. It's really hard to control people's diets over 30 years to really do this type of study, but exercise is actually better. So good, consistent, moderate levels of exercise, there's actually very nice data showing that you can age better. Not super severe exercise. Marathon runners are a whole nother world, and that's not really where the great data is. But in the end, you still got to have that DNA repair. So this is one thing. Can we do it better? Can we do it better? Okay, this was a beautiful article, by the way, just from the British Medical Journal just the other day. So I'm going to now walk you through the entire details of doing DNA repair. No, I am not. One of the cool things about DNA repair that I discovered, which I thought was so great, was that it's amazing how many different ways you can repair DNA. Every little thing that can go wrong with your DNA can be repaired. It's actually pretty incredible.
I was feeling lousy, now I'm feeling better.
You should, because you are feeling better because you keep going and doing this stuff. So the body is really incredible. It's developed multiple systems in order to repair your DNA. But, and there is no body. I mean, it's just a great thing, but it's not a perfect system. And the most difficult one is in the right corner is these double-strand break repairs, where essentially the systems have to go and compare to that other chromosome so it can rebuild the whole lattice work of the DNA. And this can happen, but it's very energy intensive. So one of the big things that your body does in terms of, everybody thinks of just pumping blood. That's where you mostly spend your energy and thinking. But in fact, one of the biggest things you do is DNA repair. It's a huge consumer of energy that allows you to keep going on a day-to-day basis. So you should really feel good that it's possible to repair your DNA and that you can keep going. Most of the DNA repair goes on at night when you're sleeping. And the reason is because there's certain things that help with the cycling of sleep and sleep. And actually the protein, one of the proteins we're going to talk about, which is this protein called P53, which is my baby that I think about all day long, and works in cycles. And it actually matches up. So at night, it actually stimulates your DNA repair the most. So what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve, so what is your DNA trying to achieve in your DNA repair? It's trying to achieve this kind of beautiful match of, a healthy lifespan. So you live to be 80, hopefully, although, can you live to be 80 and feel good about where you are at 80? And yes, some things eventually will break down, but that you're not just aging with pain, or you're not just aging by losing, well, I lost my brain, but I'm still aging. That's not a high quality of life, right? So it's maintaining an optimal lifespan, which in humans, as you know, the average lifespan right now is about 82, 83 years old, which is actually a long time. Not as long as turtles.
I know.
Right? So not as long as turtles, but actually
doesn't give me much.
It doesn't give me much too, but we take what we get and we try to do our best. But the other big pillar is tumors. So I thought I'd talk a little about tumors and why do people get cancer, right? So who here's heard about BRCA, right? Everybody's heard about BRCA. BRCA is BR, breast-related cancer, okay? It's breast-related cancer antigen 1 or BRCA2. So when you are you inherit BRCA, if you happen to be unlucky and what are you inheriting? You're inheriting a mutated BRCA, not a normal BRCA. By the way, BRCA is critical for what double-strand break repairs. That's what BRCA does every day for all of us, all the time. But people who have an abnormal BRCA are usually only missing one. They have a mutated BRCA and it just doesn't work very well. And so in any case, but with tumors, when you get a tumor, does it happen because you just have a BRCA gene, or does something else happen? So here's a quiz. If you were to go look up online at any tumor, how many mutations do you think you would see in the typical tumor cell line that you would see online?
Just one, or
in any tumor cell line? Thousands typically that they usually, but if you're in the range of 20.
okay, so
And these are 20 major mutations. And those mutations didn't happen at the start. They were acquired. So what happens if you're a BRCA and you don't repair your double-strand break so well, you can get a new mutation. And that's what often will cause it. And one of the more common things that gets mutated is P53. And so you're not able to actually repair your DNA as well. And that's how you get tumors. So tumors happen for lots of reasons, but it's mostly because the DNA gets injured. And on top of your predisposition sometimes of getting a tumor, then you get additional genes that get damaged, and then you're not able to stop a tumor from happening. Okay, so I just thought we'd take a break on that because everybody worries about this. And so I just want to make it easy for you to understand about tumors. Right now, you know everything, you know. So P53 job is to be the guardian of the genome. It's an amazing compound protein that we are fortunate to have at least one pair of. There are other types of animals that have more than one P53. And it balances the whole phenomenon of health span, tumor suppression, and then minimizing aging acceleration. You want to get the right blend so that we don't all die of, you've all heard of that disease that causes you to age very fast, progeria disease, but there's a specific gene there that causes you to age quickly. So we want to age reasonably slowly with high quality function and not getting tumors so that we can continue to be. And that's the job of this thing called P53. And P53 strikes this amazing balance. So when a cell, it strikes the balance of getting the gene repaired. But if it's really bad in a cell and we can afford to get rid of that cell, then it gets rid of that cell and says, I'm going to give a signal to commit suicide. And cells commit suicide all the time, just so you know. This is something called apoptosis that they just do, and they're doing it for the benefit of the good, for the benefit of the body to do it. So in your gut, that's a place of apoptosis all over the place. And there are other parts of the body which have very high levels of apoptosis. So it's a beautiful part of trying to balance this whole thing. So at night, you ought to think about this, right? When you meditate just before go to bed, just say, gee, you want to give whatever you want to go, whatever your view is, karma or something like that. That would be a non-Jewish approach, but a way to think about that. You want to think about high quality DNA repair because it helps to achieve that benefit. But if you sleep better, it will happen better.
Does this repair mostly go on when you're in REM sleep?
No, it's not just that. It's just that there's other energy is now not being used for other things as much. So you actually can, essentially channel your energy toward DNA repair, particularly when you're sleeping.
But I mean, somebody who doesn't sleep well,
it just does. It does not go as well.
It's not gonna.
You don't just get as much of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very cyclic. P53 goes in 12-hour cycles. It's not just a single 24-hour cycle. We have lots of proteins in our body that go in cycles. Proteins just don't stay all the time at one level. They're constantly moving. Why do you think that proteins particularly cycle all the time? It's to allow so that they can sense what's going on. If the protein is always at one level and can't sense what's happening in your cell. So by going up and down, your body's able to do that. There are proteins that go in 6-hour cycles, 12-hour cycles, 24-hour cycles. There's even stuff that probably goes in 7-day weekly cycles or more. So it's a very cool, your body is a very cool space. Okay, so this is what the P53 is doing, and this is the thing that I actually studied, which is P53, because I want to see can we help to do this better? and particularly in the eye, which suffers from a lot of DNA injury. And just to kind of walk you through one last way, the key of DNA repair is to age gracefully so that you're really trying to help the cell make the right decisions. I'm not helping, even your body is trying to help the cell make the right decision to protect against cancer, to not lose too many cells, only lose enough cells so that you can replace them. And then what you also want to do is retain functionality of the cells that you want to keep, which is most of your cells. You want to keep them at their highest functioning level. That's the job of the whole DNA repair system. There's some other things that go on here in P53 controls, and one of the most interesting parts that it controls is not just the DNA repair, but there's a curious thing that has to happen when you're going to repair your DNA. If you're repairing your DNA, is that a time you want to replicate the cell and make a new one? No, you want to wait, right? So the same thing, this P53 controls that cell cycle. So it'll actually slow down your cell cycle so that it gives it time to repair. And so the whole repair process, because the repair process doesn't happen just instantaneously. And particularly if you have a big break, a double-strand break, you need time to do it. So it takes more than just a couple seconds. In fact, it takes minutes. It takes a lot more than a few minutes in order to achieve that if you have a bad break in your DNA. The other thing is it gives time for the P53 to survey your entire genome. So P53 teams up with a whole bunch of other P53s, in fact, 3 others, and it produces this quaternary P53 that actually surveys your genome for breaks. It's a very, very cool process. And this is just going on all the time to really make sure you're in optimal state. So remember I said we could do it. It's possible that we could do well. Maybe in that little extra boost of P53 might do it. Well, in fact, there were a whole bunch of experiments in mice to try to produce super P53 mice. And they did achieve it, in fact, but when they first did it, they just got more of the protein to be around without all the control elements for P53. In fact, those animals did not do well. But when they got all the control elements in place and were able to implant super P53 mice, in fact, they aged normally. So they don't necessarily age longer, but what they did is age better. They were more tumor resistant, and they were more resistant to infections. And in fact, there's an animal that is one of my favorite animals in the world that does this all the time. Elephants, in fact, have 20 P53s. They're slightly different from each other, but they have 20 of them. So elephants, by the way, get almost 0 cancer. So they age longer. They're very big. Well, if they're not poached and killed,
Yeah.
in fact, the elephant lifespan is just longer than the human.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But they're living in a very different environment typically, so it's been pretty hard to judge elephant lifespan of late.
Mhm.
But they're really in the 75 to 85 zone, generally in the wild. So it's pretty incredible. So they have 20 of these genes, and it's very cool that they can essentially do. And they also are very resistant to viral infections, and that's because viruses manipulate the DNA, and they also manipulate P53 in lots of ways. COVID, which you may have heard about this theory of COVID causing excessive aging. One of the theories is because COVID actually suppresses P53. And that may be one of the reasons why COVID causes this late COVID syndrome that people are calling kind of an excessive aging. And that may be one of the major reasons for that. But in any case, we're not going to talk COVID today. That's not the goal. But it was just to give you a rare recent example. So elephants are cool. I think they're really an amazing animal. And so Paula and I and Isaiah were out bathing elephants a few weeks ago. It was actually a pretty amazing experience in Thailand because we were doing a P53. We're doing a study in Thailand with our drug. And we were at this elephant sanctuary. It was actually an amazing experience. I don't know how many of you have been up right next to an elephant, bathing an elephant. It's cool.
They love it.
And this is an Asian elephant, which is small, right?
Yeah.
So he's only about his back only goes up to about 9 feet. An African elephant would be in the 11 to 12 feet range. So it was a very cool experience. So So I wanted to get back to this. So that's really the story about DNA repair. Obviously, I didn't give you all the nitty-gritty details because I don't think any of you want to know them. But it is an amazing idea. I think, that whole concept of surveillance and doing all the time, looking for the little things, is, I think, a great way to think about Tikkun and Tikkun Olam. It's not necessarily how Tikkun Olam was particularly originally defined, but from a standpoint of this concept of constant surveillance and looking around, I think it's something we really don't even appreciate about our bodies, how constant it is, that we're always, our body is always looking for problems and always trying to repair those problems. If we do not wait for a catastrophe. Most people think of it, a catastrophe, the leg is broken. Oh yes, that's certainly a big time repair that has to happen. But most of the repair that happens when you break a leg, I'll just use a leg as an example. What is most of that? Most of that is replicative repair. The only way you got to that replicative repair of your leg is because you had been repairing your DNA all along. If you had not, you would not be able to repair it. Right? So it's a really cool concept that allows you to adapt to the moment of the catastrophic change by being in great shape so that you can actually deal with it. So to me, that's a very cool concept, and I think it's really one that I like to think about as I try to approach my little space of humanity here. So that's the only type of thing. So I just thought, now after that little preaching, I thought I'd talk about my drug for 2 minutes. So we identified this drug back in around 1998 with my team at Ross, which is now called Abbott Nutrition. And we were interested in a compound that could help people getting radiation therapy to their mouth, right? Because they were getting like what's called mantle radiation for Hodgkin's lymphoma or something like that. So they would get all these horrible sores in their mouth. So could we develop a nutritional product that could treat that problem? And we did. We identified this compound. It's a very specific compound that I can tell you what it is, by the way, because it's called ADP, adenosine diphosphate ribose, which you can all go look up. And but ADP ribose is fundamental. We didn't know it at the time. It's totally fundamental to the whole process of DNA repair in a very, very complicated way. But the cool thing was we were able to take some animals and give them a little bit of radiation injury in their mouth. In fact, just literally put it on there topically. And in fact, sure enough, we were able to reduce the amount of radiation injury that those animals got. So and it worked also for radiation on the skin. But unfortunately, Abbott didn't want to pursue it at that time. So that's a whole other matter. So I licensed the rights, and I decided, after I had a few other day jobs for a little while, that I would come back to this and see if we could do something. So we didn't understand how it worked, but what we learned over time was that by having this really great little feedback modulator, natural modulator, we could actually stimulate the pulses of P53. Not long-acting pulses, but short-acting. So we only wanted short-acting pulses of P53. And that's because if the P53 gets activated for too long, that's actually the signal to tell your cell to commit suicide, to cause apoptosis at the end. So we wanted to bolster the little blips to induce DNA repair, and that's in fact what we do. So we're right now doing trials around the world, and with little drops of our little compound called INV-102 to actually improve eye repair, like from dry eye, which is mostly from ultraviolet radiation, and we're going to be looking at other diseases, something called Fuchs, corneal dystrophy, and infections of the eye, and things like that, to really see if we can help people recover from these types of problems. So that's my drug, INV-102. It's a very cool thing.
Great, and I think the connection to, as a model for Tikkun Olam, both, the mystics saw the human being as an Olam Katan, right, as a sort of small world within ourselves, and as a model for the broader world and for the cosmos. And just on a basic sort of human level, I think I said this to you earlier, we have the traditional blessing of Asher Yatzar, right, that we thank God for making us with wisdom, and that if one little thing that were meant to be open were closed in the body, or one that was meant to be closed were open in the body, we would fall down flat. And it works both on any capillary or vein, and also any one gene or one protein or one compound in the wrong place at the wrong time, not functioning the right way, really fulfills the meaning of that blessing. And I think sort of getting to see how it all works, it sort of for me helps to have a greater appreciation of the human body and the miracle that we're even able to be here.
Yeah.